Hi, John. Thank you for having us today. Frank and I are happy to be here today and talk about our new program that was recently rolled out. I'm going to review our agenda for the webinar. First, we're going to give a brief overview of the IEEE Office of Risk and Insurance Management Services, otherwise known as ORIMS. Then we're going to review the program mission statement, give you a brief overview, talk about when the program was announced, how it's being communicated to the volunteer and staff audience, and then we'll wrap up with some takeaways, some resource information. So first off, the IEEE Office of Risk and Insurance Management Services is here in New Jersey in the IEEE Operations Center. This is the department that manages the corporate insurance program, enterprise risk management, and business continuity. And we're basically a central resource here to assist volunteers and employees. We're here to foster a proactive approach to risk management and really embed risk awareness in the culture here at IEEE. So again, central resource. Some of you may have seen my name before. I just celebrated my 20-year anniversary at IEEE, so I definitely deal with a lot of inquiries on conference insurance. So today we're going to be talking about some new guidelines that were recently developed, IEEE guidelines for working with children. The guidelines are available on our webpage. It's important to note that they were developed in conjunction with IEEE Legal and Compliance, and they were reviewed and approved by the IEEE Board of Directors. So one question we typically get is, what do you mean by children? This term is defined in the guidelines, but in general, it refers to any child under the age of 18. So here's our program mission statement. Our office absolutely supports IEEE's initiative in sponsoring STEM activities, and we just want to make sure that we're providing an enriching and safe environment for all children that are participating in those types of activities. So here's an overview of the program. Like I mentioned, in November 2017, the guidelines and procedures were presented to the IEEE Board of Directors. They agreed to amend the IEEE policies to incorporate these guidelines into the IEEE policies and procedures. So if you go to the IEEE policies document, you'll actually see the guidelines referenced in our civility policy. These policies apply to all members, volunteers, and employees globally. Our next step was to research and select a vendor that was going to help us provide this awareness training and background screenings for any IEEE employees and volunteers that may be involved in these activities with children. And the vendor that we selected is Presidium, so they help us implement our program. We partnered with corporate communications to develop a communication plan. So we have a new webpage. We've had a lot of communication going out the door regarding the implementation of the program. So we invite you to visit and review our new webpage, which outlines the registration process and procedures, which Frank is going to talk about in a few moments. So the rules have changed. We now have guidelines and procedures for all volunteers and employees that are dealing with children. These guidelines, like I mentioned, were developed in conjunction with Legal and Compliance, but they include some really good best practices and tips on how to present yourself and engage with children. So now Frank's going to run through some program requirements.
Well, thank you, Karen, for that introduction and that review of the program. So the program, as Karen had stated, was designed to support volunteers and employees who are currently or are planning to participate in an IEEE activity that involves working with children. And the requirements are quite simple. We urge you to visit the webpage, review the guidelines for working with children, and review the procedures for working with children. Please register your event on our webpage. There's an electronic form that asks a couple key questions and prompts you to provide the information, and complete that at least 90 days prior to a program starting, and you will be contacted, if it's applicable, by our online training provider, Presidium, and they will send you your email information and your criteria to do the training, and if required, you may need to do a background screening. So this is a page shot of the Activities with Children webpage, and on the bottom is the webpage address. We worked long and hard to make it functional and easy to use, and something that will be a tool, and all of the important documents are linked, so it should be easy for you to navigate. The procedures are outlined, and in those outline are all the links I referred to, so you can go from the procedures to the linked documents and back again very easily. The other item I wanted to refer you to is we have a rather long list of FAQs. We tried to capture any of the major questions people would have on a rollout of a program like this, and I think we've gotten almost every instance. We have I guess one of our more popular, one of our more popular FAQs, and that is, do these guidelines apply to my conference? And the answer is, and this is very important, that the procedures for working with children do not apply to events that are open to the general public, and when children are under the supervision of their parent, guardian, or a other authorized adult, such as a school teacher, or an event that's not really designed for children. The program requirements, as I said before, need to be completed, and employees and or volunteers who do not complete the requirements are not authorized to participate in IEEE activities and programs that involve children. And as was noted earlier, this program has been authorized by the board, and we're looking to get as many employees and volunteers on board with the training and background screening if necessary. If you have any questions, you can contact Karen and I on the ORIMS alias, or as you will see shortly, we have our own individual emails, and you could email us individually.
Thanks, Frank. Now I'm going to talk about how we're actually rolling out and communicating the plan to the vast volunteer and employee audience. So we've had some messaging gone out in society and MGA newsletters. There should have been an article posted in the IEEE conference organizers newsletter. I believe also when a conference is approved and it receives an acknowledgement letter summarizing applicable insurance, we also highlight in there that if you're planning on having an activity that includes children, that you visit our webpage and follow those procedures. Frank and I may also be actually attending some volunteer meetings soon We've had some email correspondence go out to some volunteer leadership. If you're familiar with vTools and MGA Scoop, and additional webinars like today's webinar. So we just wanted to, again, review some key takeaways. We really want to point everyone to our webpage. It includes a lot of information about the program, outlines these new procedures. There's a lot of FAQs out there, so we ask that you review them. Of course, Frank and I are always here. Call us, write us. We're happy to walk you through anything. We do understand that sometimes you may not have 90 days before an event. You may not know who's going to be involved. So that we do ask that you contact us as soon as you know about an event that may include children. Here's just some resource information. Again, our webpage that includes the registration form, FAQs, the procedures regarding training, the background screening, and then our ORIMS webpage where you can read about the Enterprise Risk Management Program, corporate insurance, and business continuity management. So here's the ORIMS team. We have 2 out of 3 here today, myself, Karen, Frank, and then we also have another Frank in our department. So I think, John, hopefully you have some really good questions.
Yes,
from the audience.
We have a highly engaged audience. We have some great questions. We'll see if we stump you or not. The first question was, and it went to Frank. Could you review some other program examples that weren't covered when you touched on that slide 13?
All right, so why don't we go back to see what slide 13 is. I think that may have been the example of the FAQ on our webpage.
Right. Well, we knew this was going to be the source of some confusion because of the newness of this program and the fact that we're rolling it out. If you're having an event in which you have invited neighboring schools to bring their children to your event, and those children are being accompanied by their teachers during the day, or maybe their parents at night, that is not the type of program that needs to have the volunteers trained in order to have that program go on at a conference. However, if you're having some other sort of educational event where you're inviting minors, children below the age of 18, and they are not going to be accompanied by a parent or a teacher, those are the events that we want to have volunteers and or employees trained to be able to facilitate those programs correctly.
And Frank, would that apply to also to like exhibitors that could potentially be at your conference?
The exhibitor is coming there. We have no control over the exhibitor. We only have control over our volunteers and the employees that may be attending that conference.
Okay, very good. Karen, question. How do I register an IEEE program that involves working with children? And can you define a little bit what the program primary contact is?
Sure. So as Frank mentioned, we have an online registration form. If you visit our webpage, you click on the online form, it's going to ask you for some basic information, the name of the program, date of the program, who are the volunteers involved. And we do ask that the program elects a primary contact. That would be the liaison that's going to coordinate and talk to Frank and I about the activity. So once you register a program, Frank and I are going to be reviewing the information and determine whether or not, you need to be referred for any additional training or background screening.
Okay. The next question I think you kind of touched on, if you missed the 90-day registration deadline, I guess you've kind of come up against that. It's just basically, even if it's late, it's definitely better late than never, right?
Yeah, we have 90 days out there because we want to make sure that there's enough time to complete any required training or background screening. But certainly we ask that you give us as much time as possible. But certainly if it's within that 90-day window, it's not going to.
Okay. And here's potentially a treasurer asking us, is there a cost associated with completing online training, background screening, that type of thing? Is anything costed back to the conference?
No, there are no costs being allocated back to a conference. Our group is absorbing all the cost of training any individual who's going to be working with children, and we're also absorbing the cost of any background screening that may need to occur. So it's a great program, and what makes it even better is it's free to the conference.
Right, and I just wanted to jump in, John, and just mention that once you are trained and go through that process, the training is actually good for 3 years. So you're actually able to go on and receive a certificate that says you've completed the training. And also we have access to that data to know who has completed the training. So
okay, and this is a kind of a follow-up on this. I guess, we're dealing with some private issues here, and the question is who reviews the results of the background screening, and who would that information be shared with?
The background screening information is obviously going to be gathered by the company who is our partner in this. It was a professional organization that abides by all the rules and regulations regarding personal information, and if there is an issue that needs to be discussed, it would be discussed with the IEEE legal department, and that information is retained by the vendor, who is retaining information in accordance with all applicable laws.
Okay. We do have one last question, and it talks to as far as tracking and monitoring compliance with the rule. There's a question: are there any penalties that could occur to IEEE or a volunteer?
Well, in accordance with the civility policy, which incorporates the guidelines by reference, employees, members, and volunteers are required to comply with this program and are required to take the training and maybe have background screening done. So they need to do it as part of their responsibility as being a volunteer or an employee. And if they fail to comply, they're not authorized to work in that capacity and shouldn't be doing those types of activities.
Okay. With that, if there are any further questions, you could please send them in. We're just going to touch on 1 or 2 slides before we end today's webinar. I want to walk you through a couple slides on the Center for the Leadership Excellence, which is where the Conference Organizer Education Program resides. It's a learning management system dedicated to our volunteers. For conferences, we've developed these very nice role-based learning tracks. So depending on your role, whether you're a new or experienced, say, conference chair, there's always new things to check out. We would highly encourage you taking a look at some of the e-learning courses and webinar playbacks. You basically get those best practices before you get started, which always saves you time, makes you more efficient. Here's a look at the screen. Very clean looking, very easy looking. There's some great topics. We highlighted some of the finance topics here, how to develop your conference budget. We work with Frank Hubner, a highly experienced IEEE volunteer. So we're not just, we're working with volunteers on this as much as we can. And if you're a volunteer out there who wants to work or collaborate on an educational course, my name is John Tracy. I would be more than happy to do so. With that, just give me a moment. I'm going to check to see if we have any other last-minute questions that came in via chat.
Sure, John. And again, just wanted to reiterate that we understand it's a new program. There's going to be lots of questions, so we really encourage you to reach out to Frank and I. Again, our contact information was listed in there, as well as our office alias, where you can reach us at lrims@ieee.org.